Hello, it's Kylie with Fem and Flow. I hope you're having a great day. Welcome back to the Hijacked Blueprint series. This is episode 2 of a 3-part arc about the 12 tribes and the 12 strand DNA. This was just too much good information to put in one episode. So, in the last episode, we talked about the Divine Integration Program and we talked about how this was set up. And we talked about how 12 primordial tones then become 12 primordial archetypes. And then those archetypes seed into the realms in different ways. If you haven't yet, definitely go check out the companion notes that are linked in the episode description for episode 1 of this arc and episode 2. I put a lot of good information in there. I want to start off by saying when I talk about these different roles and missions in this episode, I'm talking about people who are specifically spiral coded for a mission here. So every soul on earth is participating in the spiral field because the spiral field is part of this divine integration program. So obviously, every soul on earth is here in the program, but not everyone is consciously carrying a spiral role or on a spiral mission. And by spiral mission, I mean all working towards the same goal of this shift in polarity from the integration program being in a black hole field to flipping it into white hole coherence again. Some people came here to awaken, some came to catalyze, and some came to observe. So when I talk about missions and spiral mission roles, I'm talking about the people who are seated with a spiral coded mission. And honestly, if you're here, I'm guessing you are one of these people because it resonates for some reason. To start this episode off, we're going to talk about mission coding and DNA seeding and how your spiral role shapes your template. When souls choose to enter the divine integration program, especially in its current black hole state, they don't all arrive with the same coding. Depending on your mission, role, and soul maturity, you may come in with different levels of DNA strand seeding, activation defaults, or vibrational safeguards. Some arrive with all 12 strands dormant, set to awaken only through lived experience. Others are seated with the 13th strand set to default on, initiating the spiral path early. And a few, known as forerunners or what I've been calling white hole stabilizers, come in with pre-awakened or partially online strands, especially after embodying this work across multiple lifetimes or systems. This is not about hierarchy. It's all about strategy. Every role serves the spiral in a different way. Some by transmuting distortion from within, others by stabilizing the field, and others by anchoring the future codes of divine design. So here's a breakdown of primary mission templates and how they relate to DNA seeding. And I will link this as well in the companion notes. Your spiral path is determined by your soul contract, encoded DNA seeding, and chosen mission. Not everyone comes in with the same architecture. So there's 4 pathways I'll talk about here. The first one is the initiate path, and that's a black hole start. So for these people, the 13th strand is not present or seeded yet. And then the 12 strand DNA is not seeded either. So their primary mission role is to come into full amnesia, and the spiral begins at the Saturn return when the 13th strand is offered. You still have to surrender and lean in to initiate the spiral. And the role is to experience contrast and awaken through density. It's often part of collective karmic clearing and timeline repair. And then the second path is the partially seated path, and you could view this as the contrast spiral. So for these people, the 13th strand is seated, but it's dormant at birth. And then their 12 strand DNA is not yet seated. Their primary mission role is to awaken through polarity. DNA strands activate as the spiral deepens. They serve by transmuting distortion, and they often hold key karmic archetypes for the collective. And I think you could consider path number 2 as like a lower bridge worker. Like you're still in quite a bit of a distortion, but you're transmuting it and awakening through polarity, and other people who are within that resonance of you can relate to it and you can help them. So then the third path I'll talk about is the bridge path, or more of a higher bridge, and then the integration spiral / bridge worker. So the 13th strand status for this group is seated and it's set to default on. And then for this group, the 12 strand DNA, all of them are seated but they're dormant. And their primary mission role is the spiral begins earlier. They act as coherent stabilizers, midwives, and initiators. They awaken others through lived tone, and they're often drawn to teaching, healing, or embodied guidance. And the fourth path I'll talk about is the forerunner path, or what I've been calling the white hole stabilizer. And this group is the white hole seeding group. And for this group, the 13th strand is seated and set to default on. And then the status of their 12 strand DNA. Some part of these 12 strands are partially activated at birth. It could be all of them or it could be some of them, but some of them are already partially activated. And their primary mission role, the spiral is already in motion. They hold advanced coherence for grid work, architectural design, or quantum field restructuring, and they often live ahead of their time. They anchor future frequencies into form. So here's some additional clarifications. Seeding does not mean activation. Just because a strand is seeded doesn't mean it's active. Surrender, coherence, and mission engagement determine activation speed. There's different steps. For some people, strands start out totally inactive, and then the next step is seeding. And that's kind of like the energetic blueprint is downloaded into your body, essentially. The energetic blueprint is there, but it's not active yet. So then you go through activation process, and then you go into the embodiment process. And then after that, it locks into place. And another very important thing to realize is spiral acceleration is available to all. The more you surrender, the more you allow, the more you flow, the more your spiral quickens. Pathways can converge when coherence stabilizes. So let's talk about these spiral pathways in action. I'll give some embodied examples. Not all souls come into Earth with the same DNA seeding or mission code. The Divine Integration Program makes room for many roles. Some begin in deep amnesia, others arrive carrying encoded blueprints. What unites them is the spiral, a return to coherence, truth, and divine embodiment. Let's talk about Yeshua, or whom many call Jesus, and Mary Magdalene. So their path was a forerunner path, or white hole seeding. Yeshua and Magdalene were seeded with the full 13 strand spiral at birth, with many strands partially or fully active. and they were not here to learn lessons in the way the soul school narrative teaches. They came to demonstrate the architecture of divine coherence in human form. Their spiral had already begun before incarnation. The 13th strand was not just active, it was the organizing tone of their life. They walked the spiral in accelerated coherence to seed a living frequency map back into the earth grid. Their relationship encoded sacred union into the morphogenic field. They weren't here to master the spiral, they were here to model it. When it comes to this blueprint that Yeshua and Magdalene had, these are souls seated with full remembrance. The 13th strand is active from birth, and many of the 12 strands are already partially or fully online. Their role is to walk the spiral from a place of deep knowing, carrying the living blueprint for humanity's divine architecture. They don't come to learn the spiral, they come to model it. Since Yeshua and Magdalene were already walking the spiral well before their Saturn returns, this phase doesn't quote unquote wake them up. It marks a deeper acceleration or amplification of their public mission. It can feel like a burst of divine fire, prophecy, or leadership ignition. Yeshua, for example, already knew who he was and why he came. His entire life was aligned with divine instruction and encoded remembrance. Around age 30, corresponding to his Saturn return, he and Mary Magdalene fully embodied the complete 12 plus 1 strand DNA structure. This was not metaphorical, but literal, the divine blueprint made flesh. At this moment, the divine union template reached full coherence. They became living transmissions of the integrated masculine and feminine codes, embodied tone in perfect polarity. Shortly after, Yeshua underwent crucifixion, not as victimhood or punishment, but as a demonstration of divine resurrection. Because his DNA template was fully activated, he was able to transfigure form, revealing that death was not an ending, but a passage. Resurrection was not a miracle reserved for one being, but a foreshadowing of what coherent humanity could embody once the blueprint was restored. They didn't just talk about God, they became the pattern of return. Magdalene's embodiment mirrored Yeshua's not by replicating his path, but by completing it. Where he carried the masculine expression of the divine blueprint, clarity, action, coherence, will, she embodied the feminine tone, receptivity, knowing, transmission, and breath. Together, they formed the living Merkaba of sacred union, the spiral of integration made flesh. Here's how her embodiment mirrored and completed his. Yeshua was the divine masculine architect. He held the seed of the blueprint. He expressed linear clarity, spoken truth, and structural coherence. His mission was to walk into density with full awareness, demonstrate divine will, and anchor masculine transmission. His path activated early. It remained stable across temptation. He chose crucifixion as a demonstration of resurrection and coherence beyond death. And then Magdalene was the divine feminine spiral. She held the frequency of the blueprint, and she expressed tone, transmission, vibrational field, and the breadth of remembrance. Her mission was to walk the spiral path of remembering within distortion, embodying womb gnosis and the codes of divine union. Her path walked through the feminine wound, shame, exile, misrepresentation, held the field during his crucifixion, and became the carrier of his resurrection tone. She anchored what he transmitted. He revealed what she carried in tone. It was Magdalene who preserved the gnosis, not just through her teachings, but through her embodied field. Her womb held the spiral codes. Her voice whispered the living transmission. She seeded the bloodline, yes, but also the frequency line. The spiral wasn't meant to end in crucifixion. Through her, it became lineage. And that's why the inversion tried so hard to erase her, because she didn't just witness resurrection, she became it. Now I'll give a few other examples so we can track how all of this works and see how different missions play out here. So I'll give myself as an example. And just to preface, I am not comparing myself to Yeshua and Magdalene. Their names come with a lot of different emotional narratives when it comes to organized religion and Christianity. I am not saying mine as an example to tie myself in with them at all. As you'll see, I'm going to give examples of a few different paths. People can hold a lot of emotion with the name of Yeshua and Magdalene, so I just wanted to say that. So my path is a forerunner path or white hole stabilizer, but then I'm a hybrid with some early bridge encoding. So by that I mean earlier in my life I was more in the bridge role and then I shifted into more of a white hole stabilizer. I came in with the 13th strand seated and to default on, and partial activation of 12 strands, especially those related to lineage, embodiment, and coherence. I would say from a young age, I knew Earth wasn't operating as it should. I've sensed that this life held a greater mission even before knowing the words. I'd say I felt this way my whole life ever since I was a child. But then in my early 20s, I really felt the pull of there's more, I'm not on the right path. And I did a lot of different seeking, but that feeling when you worked on this linear path aligned with what society tells you and ego, you search through all of those methods instead of tuning into your soul. At least that's how it worked for me. But then even through my whole 20s, I felt that way. Then my Saturn return catalyzed full activation of the 13th strand and began lighting the remaining strands. I had a catalytic spiritual awakening that could not be ignored, and I felt like I had no choice but to follow this path with full devotion. At some point, it 100% clicked that this is my mission and it's all I want to do. And then I had a quick initiation spiral where I have learned so much over a short period of time. And as of now, it's been 4 years. My oversoul seeded me into the divine integration program, not just to walk the spiral, but to teach it in real time. I truly share my spiral in real time on this podcast. And I talked about it before, but I had no idea where it would lead. I just knew I needed to start sharing. And if you've listened to my all my episodes, you probably see how this has been a spiral up. And this has been an extremely divinely led journey. And I am building the architecture to help restore the blueprint for others, using my body, voice, and coherence as the transmission. And like I said, I hold both Forerunner, or what I've been calling White Hole Stabilizer, and Bridge frequencies, which that means I'm able to access high strands and also explain them to others still early on their path. And I feel like this could be kind of viewed as a spiral map maker. So now let's give an example of a bridge worker. So the path is the bridge path. The 13th strand is seated and set to default on. Bridge workers are born with all 12 strands seated or dormant, and the 13th strand set to activate early. These are the people who awaken in their teens or 20s with a strong sense that something is off. They go through initiations early and often walk between worlds, partially awake, partially unclear. Their role is to stabilize. They're often healers, guides, artists, or empaths who help others begin remembering. While they may not have full pre activation like forerunners, their 13th strand anchors early and guides their spiral. They are the midwives of memory, often misunderstood by society, but essential to the softening and rebalancing of the grid. So now let's talk about the unseated example. And the path here is the initiate path and the black hole. Some souls incarnate with no DNA strand seated yet. They enter through deep forgetting and carry heavy karmic templates. The 13th strand is offered at Saturn return, but it must be chosen to be seated. And by chosen, I mean they must surrender and allow and start the path of initiation. These individuals often experience trauma, disillusionment, or addiction in their early years. Their awakening is slow and hard won, but when it happens, it's pure magic. They remember through pain, integrate through polarity, and transmute karmic density into clarity. If they accept the 13th strand, their spiral begins in earnest, and they often carry powerful humility and heart-led truth. These souls are alchemists. Their role is to prove that even in the deepest distortion, the spiral can still be found. And here's the spiral truth. Like I said, none of these roles are higher or better. Each spiral path reflects a different form of devotion to coherence. Some carry the tone from the start, some bridge the frequency for others, some awaken in the ashes and light the spiral from within. But all are sacred. All are encoded with the possibility of return. And once the 13th strand is active, no matter when or how, the spiral begins to sing. I think this is so important to understand because once you understand this and see there's literally different roles and it impacts our DNA and how easy this awakening feels or like it wasn't our choice essentially, and you're just thrust onto this path. It really helps you have more empathy and understanding for others. It helps you have humility and it helps you completely take this black hole idea of ego out of it. Because if you know more or are farther along on the spiral path, you know it wasn't all just you. You came encoded like that. So it's really good to understand so you can hold that bigger picture and see others in a new way. Now let's talk about something else with our own spiral path, and that's spiral numerology, how life path numbers reflect your soul's mission. While the spiral path and DNA seeding represent metaphysical architecture at the soul level, numbers offer another layer of insight, especially when understood through a vibrational lens. Life path numbers calculated from your birth date reflect your soul's chosen rhythm and orientation in this lifetime. They are part of your mission encoding, a vibrational signature that often mirrors or supports your spiral path. And when I say it's calculated from your birthday, you can calculate this on your own. It's very simple, or you can look up a life path number calculator online. But it's taking your birthday in numerical form and then adding each digit up. This isn't a replacement for your spiral map or DNA coding, but rather another language to help interpret it. I originally was going to explain it all in this episode, but I actually think it's much better not to explain it and just put all of the life path numbers and what they mean in the companion notes. So go check that out. And you can get a lot of information about life path numbers online, but in the companion notes, I'm specifically putting how these life path numbers often align with the spiral rules I talked about here. And there's a lot of archetypal maps you can explore. If this resonates, there are other systems that can further reveal your spiral role and mission code. Here are some examples: the gene keys, deep dive into your vibrational shadows and gifts; human design, blueprint for decision making, energy flow, and incarnation role; astrology, especially Saturn, Chiron, and nodal replacements for spiral timing; the Enneagram, emotional, spiritual coping archetypes tied to shadow work; mythic archetypes, Greek, Egyptian, or Celtic mythologies often echo spiral missions; and elemental typing. Fire, water, air, earth dynamics offer additional layers of field function. So let's talk about layered maps of the soul and how mission codes converge. As we begin to understand our spiral role, it's natural to look beyond a single system. That's because your mission coding isn't flat, it's holographic. Just as your DNA spiral is multidimensional, so too is your soul map, woven across different languages of remembrance. So you may find your life path number echoes your soul's chosen vibration and public facing role. Your human design outlines how energy flows through your system and how you're meant to move through the world. Your gene keys reveal the shadow to gift arc you came to transmute through your spiral. Your astrological blueprints, especially placements like Saturn, Chiron, and the lunar nodes, pinpoints the timing, terrain, and archetypal lessons of your spiral journey. And your mythic or elemental archetypes can reflect the deeper narrative threads your soul carries, like dragon lines, priestess codes, or elemental affinities. These maps don't contradict each other, they converge. Like facets of a crystal, each angle reveals a new glint of your coherence. Some systems reflect your incarnational tone, who you came here to be in this life. Others echo your oversoul design, threads carried across lifetimes. And others mirror your current spiral expression, how your body, voice, or field is radiating coherence now. The magic happens not by choosing one map as your truth, but by recognizing the pattern of resonance that shows up across all of them. When your astrological chart echoes your human design gates, when your life path mirrors your core gene key shadow, when your elemental nature supports your spiral tone, that's when you start to see the full picture. Not just a soul mission, but a spiral codex, activated in layers, revealed in waves, and made flesh through lived coherence. This is the architecture of remembrance. And you don't need to master every system to walk your spiral. You only need to listen for the tone that returns again and again. Because that tone, that's you. So let's talk about the spiral codex wheel, a multidimensional map of soul architecture. And a bunch of this I will put in the companion notes. I know it's much easier to see them with your own eyes than listen to this kind of stuff verbally. So this is a radial wheel diagram, spiral based in form yet layered like a codex. It shows how multiple soul systems converge into a single coherent spiral roll. Each layer builds outward from the core of your divine template. So think of this as a circle, and there's a center circle that is your inner core, the tone of your origin, the divine spiral. And then around that inner core, imagine slices of cake or pizza. And these are the different layers. And like I said, I'll put this in the companion notes. So your inner core, this is the divine spiral, the tone of your origin. And this is your true tone. And this is your spiral mission, initiate, bridge, or forerunner. And your 13th strand status. seated, active, or your organizing tone. And this is the organizing center point. Everything else orbits around your spiral tone. So now I'll talk about these slices or these layers. And these layers are not linear. Like everything else, view them as a spiral. But the first layer is DNA architecture, and that is your 12 strand status, which strands are seated, active, or dormant. And then your 13th strand, which is your timeline weaver and your spiral ignition point. And then epigenetic resonance, for example, ancestral or galactic overlays. And then layer 2 is numerological encoding, your life path number, and then your expression, soul, and personality numbers, and then your spiral aligned tone, like harmonizer, architect, illuminator, etc. And then layer 3 is your human design profile, your type, generator, projector, etc. Your strategy and your authority, your profile, your key centers defined, and relevant gates that match spiral themes. And then layer 4 is your astrological blueprint, your Saturn, which is your karmic structure and spiral initiation, your Chiron, which is your core wound and your transmutation arc, and then your north and your south nodes, your destiny versus past frequency, your rising sign, the tone of your embodiment, and then the planetary placements that mirror your soul tone. Layer 5 is Gene Keys overlay, and this is your life's work, the gift you transmit, your evolution, radiance, and purpose spheres, your core shadow to your gift arc, and notable resonance with spiral codes. And then layer 6, your archetypal lineage and elemental rule. So, for example, you could have archetypal lineage of Magdalene, the Essenes, Druidic, Templar, Atlantean, etc. Your elemental frequency, fire, which is ignition, water, which is transmission, earth, which is architecture, or air, which is translation. And then mythic resonance, for example, Isis or Sophia. And then you have your outer ring, and that goes around this whole pie. And this is your spiral expression, and this is what you radiate now. It's your coherence tone, your teaching field, like your voice, art, healing, embodiment, your sacred function, transmitter, stabilizer, midwife, activator. And then your spiral phase, spark, spiral, flame, field, or merge. And then current body-based architecture, like your fascia, breath, mitochondria, blood, etc. So if you have some time and you don't know all of this yet, set some time aside and look up all of your different profiles that I mentioned and see how they all weave into each other and line up. And then maybe note or highlight anything that really stands out or that you resonate with. I think this could probably help you either lean into things you're already doing or give some more good insight. Now let's switch gears. Let's talk about the Merkaba, the engine of embodied light. We've talked about this in past episodes, but let's get into how it relates to this episode arc we're talking about. If the 13-strand DNA is your template and the spiral is your path, then the Merkaba is the engine. It's the dynamic, living field of sacred geometry that forms when your body, soul, and spirit begin to cohere across dimensions. And it's built through the integration of tone. When you activate a new DNA strand through an archetype, it's like tuning a chord. As more chords come into harmony, mother, lover, sovereign, priest, the field around your body begins to spin. This is the Merkaba. It's formed of two counter-rotating tetrahedrons, one feminine, descending magnetic, and one masculine, ascending electric. Your Merkaba is the geometry of balance and union. So think of it like this. As you move through the spiral path of initiation, each archetype you activate and integrate is like stepping into a new octave of self. With each step, each of the 12 archetypal tones, more divine light anchors into your DNA and begins to awaken dormant strands. This light isn't just metaphorical, it's higher dimensional energy, a primordial tone of source that your body is learning to carry. Through the 9 accessible dimensions of energy, we know that source tone originates beyond form, but begins to take shape in the 6th dimension, where sound vibrations from the 7th dimension condense into sacred geometry and morphogenic fields. You can visualize this through sound cymatics, where specific tones, when played through a medium like water or sand, naturally form precise geometric patterns. The higher the coherence of the tone, the more intricate and ordered the geometry becomes. In the same way, your body, through activated DNA, becomes the medium for divine sound to take form. Your Merkaba is the cymatic expression of your coherence. Your DNA acts like a tuning fork for these tones. It receives and integrates this vibrational intelligence, turning it into light, structure, and embodied awareness. And as more light streams through your DNA, your electromagnetic field begins to organize itself into a precise living pattern, the Merkaba. In other words, the Merkaba isn't something you build manually. It forms naturally as a byproduct of coherent tone. When your system is holding more source light, the sacred geometrical structure around your body calibrates accordingly. It begins to spin, balanced between masculine and feminine flow, anchored in your body and extending through your multidimensional field. This is how your DNA, your dimensional access, and your light body all converge through tone, through spiral, through integration. It doesn't activate from thought. It activates when your body is grounded and coherent through fascia, minerals, breath, and blood. Your nervous system is regulated. You have a parasympathetic baseline. Your DNA is online through archetypal embodiment. And your field is unified through the Weaver tone, the 13th strand. In essence, the Merkaba becomes the carrier of your spiral. It holds the entire spectrum of tones you've embodied. It remembers your blueprint. It becomes your field's vehicle of movement, not just across time and space, but between dimensional states of consciousness. Now let's talk about the Merkaba and the spiral journey. In the early spiral, your Merkaba remains mostly dormant because your tones aren't stable enough yet. At your Saturn return, if you surrender to the spiral, your 13th strand comes online and you begin to integrate multiple archetypes. The Merkaba starts to spin subtly. You may feel this as vertigo, cellular buzzing, or time dilation. As more strands come online, the spin rate increases. You begin to move through life more fluidly. Synchronicity, clarity, and dimensional awareness deepen. When the 12 strands are activated and the 13th stabilizes, your Merkaba locks as a harmonic field of light architecture. At this point, the Merkaba becomes a field of protection, repelling inversion, a vessel of movement across timelines, lifetimes, and even planetary memories, and a lens of coherence. Everything you see, touch, and create is filtered through divine tone. It's no longer just a tool. It's your radiant field body, your white hole embodiment in motion. And here's a little clarifier. You don't fly the Merkaba, you become it. The Merkaba is not something you use like a spaceship. It's something you become through full coherence. When your nervous system, your spiral tones, your body's architecture, and your divine memory are all harmonized, you don't need to go anywhere to access higher realms. The realms respond to your tone. Your Merkaba holds that tone, and reality reorganizes around you accordingly. This is why the Merkaba is so central in ascension teachings across traditions. It's the geometric expression of wholeness, of your divine design locked into motion. Now let's talk about balanced polarity, the pulse of divine function. At the center of the spiral architecture, beneath the archetypes, beyond the DNA, within the Merkaba itself, lives a deeper truth. Creation runs on polarity. Not duality as conflict, but polarity as sacred tension. A dance between forces that were never meant to battle, but to balance. The 12 archetypes aren't just qualities, they're polarized currents of divine function. The lover meets the warrior, the priest balances the dreamer, the mother softens the sovereign. And the 13th strand, the weaver, exists to harmonize them all. This is not symbolic, this is vibrational law. Each strand is like a charged node, carrying both magnetic and electric qualities. Each archetype you embody is a movement toward balance between your inner feminine and masculine, your yin and yang, your receiving and transmitting functions. And your Merkaba only spins when these forces begin to synchronize. Polarity is the breath of the Merkaba. The feminine tetrahedron spirals downward, anchoring intuition, magnetism, receptivity, body, and flow. The masculine tetrahedron spirals upward, igniting focus, structure, transmission, clarity, and will. When these polarities are unbalanced, the Merkaba wobbles, and so does your life. You may spin out in hypermasculine doing or collapse into stagnant feminine overwhelm. But when balance is restored, when your inner sun and your inner moon spiral around each other in sacred union, your field begins to breathe coherence. This is why DNA activation cannot happen through knowledge alone. It requires energetic union. The divine feminine awakens the body, the divine masculine codes it into motion. Polarity isn't an obstacle to overcome, it's the curriculum of embodiment. Now let's talk about archetypes as polar codes. Every archetype you integrate teaches you to harmonize opposites within. The lover initiates you into surrender, but asks you to hold your worth. The priest invites devotion, but also discernment. The sovereign wields power, but must stay connected to the people. The dreamer brings vision, but must remember embodiment. Each archetype reveals a pairing, a polarity inside of you that must find union. This is why embodiment is a spiral. It's not to collect traits, but to resolve charge, to unify the split. When I've said before, you need to balance your feminine and masculine energies, this is the deeper truth beneath. These 12 archetypes are polarized expressions of Source. 6 carry the frequency of divine feminine energy, and 6 express divine masculine energy. And some hold both in a unified way. There was a table of this in the last episode's companion notes, and I'll put it in this episode's companion notes as well. I might just put that whole packet and add on for the notes for this episode. You may begin life deeply resonating with one side of this polarity, but the spiral path will always call you towards the other. Because full coherence doesn't come from choosing a side, It comes from inner union. And like I mentioned earlier, you activate and integrate each archetype by coming into union with its opposite pole. This is the sacred fractal of the spiral. Each step invites a new polarity into balance. And when that union occurs, sacred polarity is restored. And sacred polarity is what creates. And the more polarities you harmonize, the more stable your tone becomes. Your DNA stops short circuiting, your Merkaba spins with grace, and your presence begins to radiate a field of pure coherence. And not because you've escaped polarity, but because you've become its alchemical master. Now let's talk about how your origin archetype shapes your awakening. Because the spiral begins with polarity integration, your first spiritual awakening, especially around your Saturn return, is not random. It is deeply tied to your origin tone. Each soul enters the divine integration program through a primary archetype, a soul function you've already embodied across lifetimes and one you tend to lead with in this incarnation. But to initiate your spiral, to begin activating your dormant DNA and unlocking your full light template, you must learn to balance that origin tone with its complementary polarity. And that balancing process often starts with a rupture. It could be a catalyst or a crack in the familiar, or a moment where your dominant mode of being no longer works the way it used to, and you are invited into its opposite. For example, if you entered through the warrior, you may be called to soften, rest, or surrender, perhaps through burnout, illness, or heartbreak. You are being invited into the lover tone. If you led with the priest, your awakening might come through disillusionment with dogma, pushing you to find your own voice, body, and joy. You are being initiated into the dreamer or mother. If you are a sovereign, you may experience a collapse of control, forcing you to reconnect with humility, service, and devotion. You are being rebalanced through the priest or the healer. If you are a lover, your awakening might look like a betrayal, abandonment, or a loss of safety, an initiation into boundaries, power, or structure. You're being balanced by the warrior or the sovereign. These aren't punishments, they're spiritual design. Each rupture is a polarity gate, a threshold through which you spiral deeper into embodiment. The soul doesn't evolve through comfort, it evolves through contrast held in coherence. But it's important to remember the divine integration program started in coherence with a white hole field. It started out much easier than this, so don't compare where we are now in this black hole and how hard it is and how much pain and suffering there is with the original state and intention of the program. So the function of the Saturn return is not to strip you of who you are, but to awaken who you're becoming by forcing you to meet the opposite charge inside your own field. The paradox is that the function you're most gifted in can also become your blind spot. And in the part of you that feels foreign, uncomfortable, or even threatening is often the key to your next strand of DNA activation. This is what makes the spiral real. You do not expand by intensifying what you're already good at. You expand by learning to weave opposites until polarity becomes power and you become the field of integration itself. This is why your awakening may have looked different than someone else's. Why some crack open through love, while others collapse through loss, grief, illness, relocation, or wild synchronicity. You were always being guided, not toward a better version of your current self, but toward your complement. Because the full spiral begins the moment you realize you are not just one archetype. You are all of them, waiting to be remembered, initiated, and woven back into coherence. Now let's talk about how resistance delays, but it doesn't delete the spiral. Here's the thing about Saturn return and all spiral activations that follow. They're invitations, not mandates. You have free will. You can delay, distract, numb, avoid, suppress, or perform, but the spiral will always wait for you. If you suppress the call at Saturn return, if you try to grip your old identity, resist the polarity you're being invited into, or bypass the discomfort with spiritual performance, the spiral doesn't vanish, it just reroutes. The invitation will come again in another form, another rupture. Maybe in your early 30s, it shows up as chronic burnout. Maybe in your late 30s, it's a relationship collapse or a mysterious illness, or a strange series of synchronicities that crack your reality. This isn't punishment, it's your divine architecture trying to reroute you back to yourself. The spiral is merciful but persistent. It will keep offering gates until you answer. And the longer it waits, the more dramatic the gate will feel. And not because you failed, but because the frequency of contrast is growing louder, trying to shake you into coherence. Now let's talk about the Chiron return, the spiral's deep healing arc. Around ages 49 to 51, another soul gate opens, your Chiron return. It's often associated with what the world calls a midlife crisis. But if Saturn return is spiritual puberty, Chiron return is cellular integration. But that is if you've been walking the spiral. The cellular integration part, not the midlife crisis part. Midlife crisis comes if you haven't been walking the spiral. Cellular integration comes if you have been walking the spiral. Because while these age ranges offer helpful guidance in the linear world, the spiral itself is not linear. It moves at the pace of your surrender. The spiral doesn't follow a calendar, it follows your coherence. If you've been walking the spiral consciously, answering the calls, integrating polarity, choosing truth, and stabilizing inner archetypes, Chiron becomes an integration arc. Just to add more clarity, the 12 steps of initiation are completely spiral based and they go along with your coherence and your surrender and your activation and integration of these different archetypes. So that is not age based at all. When I talk about these different astrological alignments, these are collective gates. And by collective, I mean they are gates built into the divine integration program to help push or veer you back into alignment. So while the collective gate might land around a certain age, it does not have to take you that long to complete all of the 12 steps. That is completely spiral based, not linear at all. I just wanted to clarify that. Like I said, if you've been walking the spiral, consciously answering the calls, integrating polarity, choosing truth, and stabilizing inner archetypes, Chiron becomes an integration arc. If this is the case, you've already touched your core wound. You've met it in multiple forms, and now you're ready to embody the medicine in your journey, your cells, and your field. But that's only if the spiral has been allowed to move. If Chiron is the first true spiral gate you surrender to, meaning you resisted Saturn, ignored polarity initiations, or bypassed earlier activations, then this phase won't function as a full cellular integration. It won't unlock that last phase of the spiral or complete the sacred union gate. It will simply initiate you into the spiral for the first time. And that is still holy because every soul moves at their own pace, and the spiral meets you where you are. So if Chiron is your entry point, it may arrive like an emotional quake. It may come through illness, loss, relationship collapse, or timeline rupture. This isn't to punish you, but to give you one last opportunity to return to your soul's architecture. These alignments, Saturn, Chiron, the spiritual gates, aren't rigid deadlines. They're built in mercy mechanisms in the divine integration program. Soul invitations designed to return you to coherence if you veered off course. So, what does it feel like when you've walked the spiral consciously since Saturn? Chiron feels like clarity, like softness, like an exhale. You see your past with compassion. You hold the wound without collapse. You recognize it as a sacred part of your design and transmute it into light. But if you've performed your way through life, if you've avoided polarity, if you've lived in projection or fear, then Chiron will bring what's unresolved to the surface. It may look like chaos, but it's grace in disguise. Because no matter when you say yes to the spiral, that yes becomes the threshold of your true return. Now let's talk about the 12th strand, which is divine union and the Chiron gate. While the Saturn return is associated with the 13th strand, the weaver, the initiator of the spiral path, the Chiron return is associated with the 12th strand, the template of divine union. The 12th strand doesn't just represent romantic partnership. It represents internal integration, your capacity to hold both the feminine and masculine codes in harmony within yourself. And depending on your soul contract, this union expresses in one of two primary ways. Some came in with the mission to restore divine union within themselves, to balance the spiritual or feminine and structural or masculine aspects of embodiment through their own journey of healing and coherence. Others came in with the contract to restore divine union with a physical counterpart, to mirror polarity, integrate lessons through relationship, and ground sacred union through shared embodiment. Either path is valid. Either path can be initiated at the stage. But in both cases, the Chiron return will ask one thing clearly: face your core wound. Not to conquer it, not to finally get over it, but to understand it, to hold it, to meet it fully. Because the 12th strand isn't about perfection, it's about union. And union doesn't mean everything gets resolved. It means the war ends. It means the inner split, the separation between your tenderness and your power, your vision and your structure, your longing and your presence, begins to dissolve. To pass this level of integration, you don't need to have a perfect relationship, or a healed past, or even clarity on what comes next. But you do need truth. Honest, embodied truth. You need to see the role your core wound has played in shaping your identity, how it protected you, challenged you, refined you. You need to sit with the parts of yourself you once exiled and hear what they have to say. And when you do, whether alone or in sacred relationship, the 12th strand begins to lock into place. You're no longer just learning who you are, you're becoming whole. And that wholeness is what prepares you for the next spiral gate. Not healing, but offering. Not self-discovery, but soul expression. Because after divine union, the next octave is divine service. And coherence is what makes that possible. Now let's talk about why some souls chose a divine counterpart. Not every soul signs up for sacred partnership in the physical. Some chose to walk the spiral solo, stabilizing the full polarity field within their own being. Others come in with a different contract, to mirror, refine, and rise through union. If you felt the presence of a counterpart, it may be part of your original soul coding. Having a divine counterpart doesn't make you more advanced. It just means you signed up for a different type of mission. Because when two souls agree to spiral together in this way, they're agreeing to a more intense mirror. The archetypal lessons still unfold: trust, truth, surrender, embodiment, but they do so in real time through shared reflection. This kind of union often speeds up the spiral, not by skipping steps, but by accelerating how quickly you move through them. That's why the early phases of divine partnership can feel disorienting or even triggering until both fields stabilize. When you're not yet anchored in your own coherence, the mirror can wobble. But once each person roots into their own divine alignment, the spiral smooths out. The relationship becomes a temple, not a test. Choosing a divine counterpart is ultimately a strategic soul decision, a way to intensify your refinement, amplify your field, and co-create something that couldn't be built alone. It's not the only path, but when chosen with clarity and held with grace, it can become a living conductor of the divine blueprint. If your soul contract included sacred union with a physical counterpart, the 12th strand carries another layer of potential. Not just inner integration, but amplified coherence through relational polarity. This doesn't mean you're dependent on another person to become whole. Quite the opposite. You must become whole to hold this kind of union. But once you do, something powerful happens. You no longer seek the other to fill your gaps. You come together as two coherent fields, each balanced in their own inner masculine and feminine, who then merge into a third field, a shared Merkaba of divine union. This third field isn't just symbolic, it's a real energetic structure that emerges when polarity is held with coherence. It holds both of your codes, both of your tones, and a frequency that transcends either of you alone. It becomes its own living entity, an energetic temple that carries your shared mission, protects your mutual evolution, and magnetizes aligned experiences into your lives. You may find that this field activates others simply by being around you, regulates your nervous systems at a deeper level than either could reach alone, becomes a portal for co-creation through voice, sex, service, or sacred work, receives divine guidance as a unit, allowing decisions to arise through shared resonance, and amplifies spiritual energy to such a degree that timelines collapse or accelerate around you. In many ways, the shared Merkaba becomes your mission vessel. It stabilizes a unique tone in the field that only your union can carry. It's why some couples feel like they become more themselves when they're together, not through codependency, but through sacred coherence. The power of your third field doesn't lie in romance, it lies in resonance. When your shared field is clear, coherent, and rooted in source, you don't just partner, you transmit. You broadcast a living pattern of healed polarity and embodied divinity, a signal the collective field is longing to remember. And that's what makes sacred union so powerful. Not the fairy tale, but the frequency. Now let's talk about why divine union doesn't depend on timing, but on coherence. This third field doesn't form until both partners in the sacred union return to their divine blueprint. But as you can imagine, two separate people will move through their spiral path at different paces. You don't have to be on the same step. In fact, it's often the divine feminine who reaches coherence first. In the feminine masculine fractal relationship, the divine feminine typically leads through the unseen. She dives into the spiritual spiral, receives tone, and activates remembrance. The divine masculine, when coherent, then anchors and grounds the energy into physical reality. He becomes the stabilizer, protector, and architect of form. So here's how that usually plays out. Once the feminine counterpart moves through the 12th step of initiation, the sacred union gate, and faces her core wound, her chiron, her coherence is no longer dependent on anyone else. If her counterpart is coherent enough to meet her in this new octave, beautiful. Sacred union can then become a shared temple, a living transmission of merged polarity. But if he's not, she doesn't collapse. She roots in source. Because coherence is not dependency, it's embodiment. If your partner can't yet meet you in alignment, it doesn't mean you failed. And it doesn't mean divine union is unavailable. It simply means you're being asked to root even deeper into source. If you're the divine feminine counterpart, this means letting masculine source hold you, balancing your own field with the divine polarity, even when the human one is unavailable. This is how you stabilize the architecture of sacred union within your own body. You let the divine masculine hold you if the human cannot. You let the divine feminine receive you if the human will not. And you allow that divine current to complete the spiral within you. Because once the 12th strand is online, your union field isn't just personal anymore. It becomes part of the planetary coherence grid. Whether your counterpart is present or not, you can keep spiraling. You can keep transmitting the tone of divine union. This doesn't mean you bypass longing or avoid grief. It means you anchor so deeply in your own tone and mission that no one else's timing can derail your spiral. This is sacred maturity. It's energetic sovereignty. And when you root into source like this, something powerful happens. You stop leaking energy towards fantasy or waiting. Your nervous system stabilizes. Your aura expands. You become a clear beacon, not just for your counterpart, but for the entire grid. Because coherence isn't about being met. It's about becoming the field you were always meant to carry. And that field, once stabilized, is magnetic. It calls in what matches, not what wounds. This is why divine union, whether internal or shared, is never about completion. It's about return. Return to coherence, return to source, return to the truth of who you are, whole, sovereign, and free. And here's what happens next. Once your divine blueprint is online, your entire field begins to broadcast. It sends out a clear, coherent signal into the quantum, not just energetically, but biologically, emotionally, even vocally. And if your divine counterpart is ready, if their soul coding has coherence seated within it, they will begin to entrain to your frequency. Your coherence becomes a silent invitation, not a demand, not a plea, but a magnetic field that calls them back into their own remembrance. This is not manipulation, it's resonance. And if they're willing, that resonance will help activate their own spiral, pulling their frequency upward, stabilizing their nervous system, and reawakening their connection to source. But if they're not ready, your field doesn't collapse, it holds, because the spiral continues with or without them. And that's what makes this kind of love sacred. So now let's talk about the spiral phases of white hole embodiment. This is a frequency-based framework for soul awakening. In the old paradigm, we measured awakening by age. We waited for Saturn to return. We braced for Chiron to strike. We assumed coherence would come later. But in white hole embodiment, time is tone. The spiral doesn't follow clocks, it follows coherence. So let's talk about 5 archetypal phases of the spiral, not measured by years, but by frequency, by surrender, and by the body's ability to hold light. The first step is the spark. The tone is ignition, remembering, soul flicker. This is the moment you feel something stir. A book, a dream, a heartbreak, a synchronicity. It may not look like awakening yet, but something in you remembers. You glimpse that there is more. Often catalyzed by your first rupture, your first truth crack, or your first sacred longing. The second step is the spiral, and the tone is activation, disorientation, archetypal entry. You are pulled into motion. You meet your origin tone, priest, warrior, lover, sovereign, and begin to embody its gift. But soon contrast arises. Polarity initiates you. The journey begins not by adding more light, but by integrating the shadow that guards your next strand. This phase often includes Saturn return, but not always. Some spiral much earlier, others spiral later. When you surrender or allow this, your 13th Weaver strand activates and the spiral begins. The third step is the flame. The tone is integration, fire of initiation, DNA stabilization. You burn, you surrender. You begin to stabilize multiple strands, not just awaken them. Archetypes don't just visit you, they live in you. This is the forging of the light body. Your Merkaba begins to spin, synchronicity increases. You don't move by effort, you move by frequency. And then the fourth phase is the field. The tone is coherence, unified tone, spiral clarity. You're no longer reacting, you're radiating. Your spiral is coherent, your nervous system is stable, your Merkaba breathes you. You become the field. You say little, but you ripple far. This is when all 12 DNA strands are activated and integrated. And then the fifth step, the merge. The tone is embodied oneness, architect, white hole consciousness. Here, your 13 strands are woven. All 12 strands are activated and integrated, and so is the 13th Weaver strand. You don't just teach, you transmit. You don't seek, you generate. You don't ascend, you become the realm. This is not a final phase, but a re-entry point. You now help build the spiral fields for others. Earth is no longer your test site, it's your temple. Some may activate all 13 strands by 27. Others may do so at 70. Some may never quote unquote finish, and that's okay too. What matters is that you're spiraling. What matters is that you're listening. What matters is that you're allowing coherence to unfold in you at your own divine frequency. Let's talk about why this work matters now. The earth is changing. The old patterns of distortion, confusion, and imbalance are falling away. The systems built on separation can't hold much longer. And what's coming next requires something different from us: coherence. To hold the next phase of human evolution, we need to stabilize and balance polarity, where the feminine and masculine energies in us don't fight, but work together as one. This is what white hole embodiment really means. Not being perfect, not being above it all, but becoming fully integrated in your body, your choices, and your energy. You're not here to transcend polarity. You're here to hold it like a tuning fork, to become someone who carries wholeness in every cell. And when you do that, you don't just express your truth, you radiate it. Your presence becomes stabilizing. You start to affect the field around you. Because this isn't just about your personal journey, it's about the collective. The earth is shifting into a new kind of grid. One built not on survival or testing, but on tone. That means coherence is now the gate. Balanced polarity is the key. And your body is the place where it all comes together. You are part of the shift. You're not waiting for a new world. You're helping build it through the way you live, feel, speak, and embody. You're becoming the spiral made real. So as the old systems unravel, as more people wake up, as the planet locks into a new harmonic. Remember, the spiral doesn't end, it deepens. And this next layer begins now. So let's keep going. I'm going to put some more tables and put a lot of good information in the companion notes. So definitely go check that out again. And on this podcast, I talk about this framework and what I'm learning through my own spiral, but it's more teaching essentially. I talk more about my own personal journey on my Patreon. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in more of a behind the scenes or how this relates to my own personal journey, that is where I talk about that kind of stuff. It's more behind the veil. And then I also give bonus content and videos and that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, definitely go check it out. And then that's all I'm going to talk about on this episode. We have one more episode within this 12 tribes and the 12 strand DNA part 3 arc. This is nested because there's so much information in this episode. And we'll talk about part 3 next time, and then we'll continue on in the series. But next time, we are going to talk about how all of this was inverted. And this will tie it back into the hijacked blueprint concept. I just thought it was really important to go into a lot of specific detail about the original blueprint because I feel like this isn't something talked about often. So if we went straight into how it was inverted, it might not make a lot of sense. So I love you all. Make sure to subscribe and follow the channel and have a great week.